Edmund Emil Kemper III is an American serial killer convicted of murdering 7 women and 1 girl between May 1972 and April 1973. Years earlier, at the age of 15, he had murdered his paternal grandparents. He was nicknamed the Co-Ed Killer, as most of his non-familial victims were female college students hitchhiking in the vicinity of Santa Cruz County, California. Most of his murders included found sane and guilty in his trial in 1973, he requested the death penalty for his crimes. Capital punishment was suspended in California at the time, and he instead received 8 concurrent life sentences. Since then, he's been incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born in Burbank, California on the 18th of December 1948. He was the middle child of 3 children and was the only son born to Colonel Elizabeth Kemper and Edmund Emil Kemper Jr., who was a World War II veteran who, after the war, tested nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Grounds before returning to California, where he worked as an electrician. Clarnell often complained about her husband's menial electrician job. Edmund Jr. later stated that she affected him. Weighing 13 pounds as a newborn, Kemper was taller than his peers at the age of 4. Early on, he exhibited antisocial behaviour such as cruelty to animals. At the age of 10, he buried his pet cat alive, then dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. He later then derived pleasure from successfully lying to his family about killing the cat. At the age of 13, he killed another family cat, which he thought favoured his younger sister over him. He kept pieces of it in his closet. He was known to harbour dark fantasies and have a morbid imagination. In his youth, he performed rites with his younger sister's dolls that culminated in his removing their heads and hands. On one occasion, when his elder sister, Susan Huey Kemper, teased him and asked him why he didn't try to kiss his teacher, he replied, He recalled that as a young boy, he would sneak out of his house, armed with his father's bayonet, to go to his second-grade teacher's house to watch her through the windows. He also stated in interviews in his later life that some of his favourite games to play as a child were gas chamber and electric chair, in which he asked his younger sister to tie him up and flip an imaginary switch. He would then fumble over and writhe on the floor, pretending that he was being executed by gas inhalation or electric shock. He also came close to death several times as a child. Once his elder sister tried to push him in front of a train. Another time she pushed him into the deep end of a swimming pool where he almost drowned. He had a close relationship with his father and was notably devastated when his parents separated in 1957 and divorced in 1961. He was sent to live with his mother in Helena, Montana. He had a severely dysfunctional relationship with his mother, who was said to be a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who frequently belittled, humiliated, and beat him with a belt. She often made him sleep in a locked basement because she feared that he would harm his sisters, regularly mocked him for his large size. He stood at 6'4" at the age of 15, and derided him as in a phone conversation to his father, unaware that her son had been eavesdropping. She also refused to show him affection out of fear that he would and told the young Kemper that he reminded her of his father and that no woman would ever love him. Kemper later described her as and it's been postulated that she had BPD. At the age of 14, he ran away from home in an attempt to reconcile with his father in Van Nuys, California. Once there, he learned that his father had remarried and now had a stepson. He stayed with his father for a short while until his dad sent him to live with his paternal grandparents, who lived on a ranch in the foothills of Sierra Nevada on Road 224, about 2 miles west of the town of North Fork. He hated living in Norfolk. He described his grandfather as senile and said that his grandmother was On the 27th of August 1964, at the age of 15, he killed his grandmother, Maud Matilda Huey Kemper, with a rifle after an argument, shooting her once in the head and twice in the back, then stabbing her several times. When his grandfather Edmund Emil Kemper Sr. came home, Kemper fatally shot him in his driveway. He then phoned his mother, who told him to phone the police. He did so and waited for the police to arrive. He told the police that he and later said that he killed his grandfather because he would be angry with him. Psychiatrist Donald Lundy, who interviewed Kemper during his adulthood, wrote, Kemper's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was sent to Asadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility in San Luis Obispo County that houses mentally ill convicts. At Atascadero, California Youth Authority psychiatrists and social workers disagreed with the court psychiatrist's diagnoses. Their report stated that Kemper showed They also observed him to be intelligent and introspective. Initial testing measured his IQ at 136, more than 2 standard deviations above the average. He was then re-diagnosed with a less severe condition, A. Later during his stay at Atascadero, he was given another IQ test which produced a high result of 145. He endeared himself to his psychiatrist by being a model prisoner, and he was trained to administer psychiatric tests to other inmates. The psychiatrist later said, he also became a member of the JCs while in Atascadero and claimed to have developed specifically an overt hostility scale during his work with Atascadero psychiatrists. After his second arrest, he said that being able to understand how these functioned allowed him to manipulate his psychiatrists, admitting that he learned a lot from the ex-offenders to whom he administered the tests. On the 18th of December 1969, on his 21st birthday, he was released on parole from Atascadero. Against the recommendations of psychiatrists at the hospital, he was released into the care of his mother, who, at the time, had remarried, taken the surname Strandberg, and divorced again. She then resided in Aptos, California, a short drive from where she worked as an administrative assistant at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Kemper later demonstrated further to the psychiatrist that he was rehabilitated, and on the 29th of November 1972, his juvenile records were permanently expunged. The last report from his probation psychiatrist read, while staying with his mother, he attended community college in accordance with his parole requirements and had hoped to become a police officer, although he was rejected because of his size. At the time of his release from Atascadero, he stood at 6 feet 9, which led him to his nickname Big Ed. He maintained relationships with the Santa Cruz police officers despite his rejection. From joining the force and became a self-described friendly nuisance at the bar called the Jury Room, a popular hangout for local cops. He worked a series of menial jobs before gaining employment with the State of California Division of Highways in 1971. During this time, his relationship with his mother remained toxic and hostile, the two having frequent arguments that the neighbours often overheard. He later described the arguments he had with his mother around this time, stating the following. When he'd saved enough money, he moved out to live with a friend in Alameda. Then he still complained about being unable to get away from his mother because she regularly phoned him and paid him with surprise visits. He often had financial difficulties which resulted in him frequently returning to his mother's apartment in Aptos. When he was in his early 20s, he met a female student from the Turlock High School at a Santa Cruz beach, and the two became engaged in March 1973. Their engagement lasted over a year before being broken off due to his second arrest. Her parents requested her name not to be revealed to the public. She was reportedly 17 and still attending high school at that time. That same year, he began working for the Highway Division. He was hit by a car while riding a motorcycle that he had just recently purchased. His arm was badly injured in the crash and he received $15,000, equivalent to $106,248 in 2024. settlement in the civil suit he filed against the car's driver. As he was driving around in the 1969 Ford Galaxy he bought with part of his settlement money, he noticed a large number of young women hitchhiking and began storing plastic bags, knives, blankets, and handcuffs in the car, which to some wouldn't be their first thought. He first picked up a young woman hitchhiking, then peacefully let them go. According to him, he picked up around 150 hitchhikers who were in line with this pattern. This was before he felt homicidal actual urges, which he called his and which he later began acting on. At times, he blamed the women he killed for hitchhiking, which he said was between May 1972 and April 1973, he killed 8 people. He would pick up female students who were hitchhiking and take them to isolated areas where he would shoot, stab, smother, or strangle them. He would then take their bodies back to his home, where he decapitated them, performed irrumatio on their severed heads, had sexual intercourse with their corpses, and then dismembered them. During his 11-month murder spree, he killed 5 college students, 1 high school student, his mother, and his mother's best friend. After having arguments with his mother and that she refused to introduce him to women attending the university where she worked. He recalled, he stated in interviews that he often searched for victims. Psychiatrist and Kemper himself have espoused the belief that the young women were surrogates for his ultimate target, his mother. On the 7th of May 1972, he was driving in Berkeley when he picked up 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students from Fresno State University, Mary Ann Pesch and Anita Mary Luchessa, with the pretense of taking them to Stanford University. After driving for an hour, he managed to reach a secluded wooded area near Alameda, with which he was familiar from his work with the highway department, without alerting his passengers that he had changed directions from where they wanted to go. It was there that he handcuffed Pesch and locked Luchessa in the trunk, then stabbed and strangled Pesch to death, subsequently killing Luchessa in a similar manner. He later confessed that while handcuffing Pesch, he adding that he said, after grazing her breast, despite murdering her minutes later. He also noted that he chose the women because they seemed upper middle class. He put both of the women's bodies in the trunk of his Ford Galaxy and returned to his apartment. However, he was stopped on the way by a police officer for having a broken taillight, but the officer didn't detect the corpses in the car. His roommate was not home, so he took the bodies into his apartment, where he photographed and had sexual intercourse with the women before dismembering them. He then put their body parts into plastic bags, which he abandoned near Loma Prieta Mountain. Before disposing of Pesch's and Luchessa's severed heads in a ravine, he engaged with irrumatio with both of them. In August of that year, Pesch's skull was found on the Loma Prieta Mountain. An excessive search failed to turn up the rest of Pesch's remains or the trace of Luchessa. On the evening of the 17th of September 1972, he picked up a 15-year-old dance student named Aiko Ku, who had decided to hitchhike to a dance class after missing her bus. He again drove to a remote area where he pulled a gun on her before accidentally locking himself out of the car. However, she sadly let him back inside, despite the fact that the gun was still in the car. When back inside the car, he proceeded to choke her unconscious, her, and kill her. He subsequently packed her body into the trunk of his car and went to a nearby bar to have a few drinks, then returned to his apartment. He later confessed after exiting the bar, he opened the trunk of his car. Back at his apartment, he had sexual intercourse with the corpse, then dismembered and disposed of the remains in a similar manner to his previous 2 victims. Her mother called police to report the disappearance of her daughter and put up hundreds of flyers for asking for information, but she didn't receive any responses regarding her daughter's location or status. On the 7th of January 1973, he'd moved back in with his mother and was driving around the Cabrillo College campus when he picked up 18-year-old student Cynthia Ann Cindy Shaw. He drove to a wooded area and fatally shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. He then placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to his mother's house, where he kept her body hidden in a closet in his room overnight. When his mother left for work the next morning, he had sexual intercourse with her and removed the bullet from her, then dismembered and decapitated her in his mother's bathtub. He kept her severed head for several days, regularly engaging in erumatio with it, then buried it in his mother's garden facing upwards to her bedroom. After his arrest, he stated that he did this because his mother He discarded the rest of her remains by throwing them off a cliff. Over the course of the following few weeks, all except her head and right hand were discovered. A pathologist determined that she had been cut into pieces with a power saw. On the 5th of February 1973, after a heated argument with his mother, he left his house in search of possible victims. With heightened suspicion of a serial killer preying on hitchhikers in the Santa Cruz area, students had been advised to accept rides only from cars with university stickers on them. He was able to obtain a sticker as his mother worked at UC Santa Cruz. He separately encountered 23-year-old Rosalind Heather Thorpe and 20-year-old Alice Helen Allison Liu on the USCS campus. According to Kemper, he first encountered Thorpe as she exited a building having attended a lecture. Thorpe entered the front passenger seat, believing Kemper to be a fellow student, began chatting amicably as he drove. Shortly thereafter, he observed Liu, whom he described as a He stopped his vehicle and Liu entered the back seat of the car. Shortly thereafter, he slowed his vehicle, then shot Thorpe in the head with a .22 pistol. He then turned towards Liu at the back seat of his car. The first two shots missed the terrified girl, although the third bullet hit her in the temple. Their bodies were then wrapped in blankets. He then again brought their bodies back to his mother's house. This time he beheaded them in his car and carried the headless corpses into his mother's house to have sexual intercourse with them. He then dismembered their bodies, removed the bullets to prevent identification, and disregarded their remains the next morning. Some remains were found at Eden Canyon a week later, and more were found near Route 1 in March. When questioned in an interview about why he decapitated his victims, he explained, On the 20th of April 1973, he was awakened by his mother coming home from a party. While sitting on her bed, reading a book, she noticed Kemper enter the room and said to him, He replied, He waited for her to fall asleep, then snuck it back into a room to bludgeon her with a claw hammer and slit her throat with a penknife. He then beheaded her and, as he stated in a 1984 interview, he stated that he and ultimately he also cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal. However, the garbage disposal could not break down the tough vocal cords and ejected the tissue back into the sink. Kemper later said, He hid his mother's corpse in a closet and went to drink at a nearby bar. Upon his return, he invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor Sally Hallett, over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. When she arrived, he strangled her. He subsequently put her corpse in a closet, obscured any outward signs of a disturbance, and left a note to the police. It read, Afterward, he fled the scene. He drove non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the over 1,000-mile journey. He had 3 guns and 100 rounds of ammunition in his car, and he believed that he was the target of an active manhunt. After not hearing any news on the radio about the murders of his mother and Hallett, when he arrived in Pueblo, he found a phone booth and called the police. He confessed to the murders of his mother and Hallett, but the police didn't take his call seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, Kemper called again, asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He confessed to that officer of killing his mother and Hallett, then waited for the police to arrive and take him into custody. Upon his capture, he also confessed to the murders of the 6 students. When asked in a later interview why he turned himself in, he said, Kemper was indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder on the 7th of May 1973. he was assigned the Chief Public Defender of Santa Cruz County, Attorney Jim Jackson. Due to his explicit and detailed confessions, his counsel's only option was to plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the charges. He attempted suicide twice while in custody, allegedly both times with a pen. His trial went ahead on the 23rd of October 1973. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists found him legally sane. One of the psychiatrists, Dr. Joel Fort, investigated his juvenile records and the diagnosis he was given, once psychotic. Fort also interviewed Kemper, including under the truth serum, and relayed to the court that Kemper had engaged in cannibalism, alleging that he sliced the flesh from the legs of his victims and cooked them and consumed the strips of flesh in a casserole. Nevertheless, Fort determined that Kemper was fully cognizant in each case and stated that Kemper enjoyed the prospect of the infamy associated with being labelled a murderer. Kemper later recanted the confession of cannibalism. California used the M. Gaten standard, which held for a defendant to Kemper appeared to have known the nature of his acts was wrong, and he had shown signs of malice aforethought. On the 1st of November, he took the stand. He testified that he killed the victims because he wanted them and attempted to convince the jury that he was insane based on the reasoning that his actions could have been committed by only someone with an aberrant mind. He stated that 2 beings inhabited his body, and that when the killer personality took over, it was On the 8th of November 1973, the 6-man, 6-woman jury deliberated for about 5 hours before declaring Kemper was sane and guilty on all counts. He asked for the death penalty, requesting However, a moratorium placed on capital punishment by the Supreme Court of California, he received 7 years life for each count, with these terms to be served concurrently, and was sentenced to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Shortly after arriving at California Medical Facility in 1973, he was admitted to psychiatrists for re-evaluation. He was diagnosed with antisocial, narcissistic, and schizotypal personality disorders. He's a Christian and has stated in an interview that he had In the California Medical Facility, he was incarcerated in the same prison block as other notorious criminals such as Herbert Mullin and Charles Manson. Kemper showed a particular disdain for Mullin, who committed his murders at the same time and area as Kemper. He described Mullin as Kemper manipulated and physically intimidated Mullin, who at 5'9" was a foot shorter than him. Kemper stated that Kemper remains among the general population in prison and is considered a model prisoner. He's in charge of scheduling other inmates' appointments and psychiatrists and was an accomplished craftsman of ceramic cups. He was a prolific narrator of audiobooks for a charity program that prepared material for the visually impaired. A 1987 Los Angeles Times article stated that he was the coordinator of the prison's program and personally spent over 5,000 hours narrating books with several hundred completed recordings to his name. He was retired from these positions in 2015 after he experienced a stroke and was declared medically disabled. He received his first rules violation report in 2016 for failing to provide a urine sample. While in prison, he had participated in a number of interviews, including a segment in the 1982 documentary The Killing of America, as well as an appearance in the 1984 documentary Murder, No Apparent Motive. His interviews have contributed to the understanding of the mind of serial killers. FBI profiler Johnny Douglas described him as prison inmates he interviewed and capable of He further added that he personally liked Kemper, referring to him as However, Kemper's discussions with Robert Ressler changed how the FBI conducted interviews with serial killers. According to Ann Burgess, Kemper told Ressler at the end of one of their interviews, After the guard came back, Kemper said he was joking. Regardless, FBI agents were required to conduct interviews in pairs and no longer do this alone. Kemper is forthcoming about the nature of his crimes and has stated that he participated in the interviews to save others like himself from killing. At the end of his Murder No Apparent Motive interview, he said, he also conducted an interview with French writer Stéphane Bourgeois in 1991. Kemper was first liable for parole in 1979. He was denied parole that year, as well as parole hearings in 1980, 1981, and 1982. He subsequently waived his right for a hearing in 1985. He was denied parole in 1988 hearing where he said, he was denied parole again in 1991 and 1994. He then waived his right to a hearing in 1997 and in 2002. He attended his next hearing in 2007, where he was again denied parole. Prosecutor Adrienne Simmons said, he waived his right to a hearing again in 2012. He was denied parole in 2017, and after declining to attend a parole hearing in 2024, he was denied parole again. He is next liable for parole in 2031. Following his 2024 parole hearing, it was reported that he was wheelchair-bound and suffered from diabetes and coronary heart disease. A psychiatric evaluation conducted in April 2024 classed him as high risk to reoffend. I've included some links to interviews that I found of Kemper on YouTube in the comments. Feel free to watch them after this video. Thanks for watching.